Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. We will get started in just a few minutes. We're going to get started in about one more minute. We're going to go ahead and post the link to the slide deck in the chat box. So anybody who wants to access the slide deck can do that through the link. All right, if you open up that chat box, there is a link to the slide deck for today's presentation for anybody who wants to go access that. We'll share the link to the slide deck a few more times in the next 5 to 10 minutes, just for anybody who comes in late. So if you missed it the first time, my colleague Sarah will go ahead and put that back in the chat box, and she'll do it again in a few more minutes for anyone else who might be just joining us a little late. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. We got a lot of information to cover with you all today. Just want to start by saying welcome. Thanks for joining the webinar today. Just so everyone knows, this webinar is specifically for school systems that exceeded 1% participation in the alternate assessment in any subject. These school systems are required to complete an alternate assessment review process. Today, we'll go through this process in more detail. So again, this information in this webinar is going to be specifically targeting those school systems that did exceed 1% participation in the alternate assessment in any subject. As you take a look over the agenda, I'll just cover a few webinar logistics. First, if you're experiencing any audio difficulties, please make sure that your speakers are on and that your volume's at a suitable level. The call is in listen-only mode, Just to ensure that we get through the information, please type questions into the chat box. I'll just periodically pause throughout the presentation to see what questions are in there and what we can answer. You're always welcome to send questions anytime to specialeducation@la.gov. So the purpose of the webinar is to provide specific details and guidance to help school systems know how to complete the alternate assessment review process and how to submit all the required documents and student files for this process. Before we get into the documents that were loaded onto your FTP drives, I'm just going to give you a little background on why we have this review process. Again, we're just going to do that before we take a look and really dive into those packages that your school systems received in the beginning of August. So the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, requires school systems exceeding 1% participation in the alternate assessment to submit information to the department and take certain actions. In addition to this, our BESI Bulletin 111 requires school systems exceeding 1% participation in any content area of the alternate assessment to request an alternate assessment participation review from the department. In the spring of 2020, the alternate assessment testing window closed just before we all had our extended school facility closures. So what this means is that students were able to participate in the LEAP Connect, even though regular assessments were not administered this past spring. So for the purposes of fulfilling this ESSA requirement, the U.S. Department of Education and OSEP require states to use test registration and IEP information from the 2019-2020 school year to just make a credible estimate of the number and percentage of students who exceeded the 1% participation threshold. So this information, along with enrollment data, was used to determine each school system's participation percentage. This year's alternate assessment review process, it is very similar to last year. We did make a few changes just to try to provide some flexibility where we could for school systems. We know that you all are very busy, and we just want to stay very sensitive to that. And so we mirrored this after last year's process as much as possible, and we did try to make some changes just to give some flexibility. In previous years, if schools exceeded 1% participation, they did have to submit a justification form and conduct an internal file review. For those of you who have downloaded and accessed your packages already on FTP, you know that there is no justification form or internal file review required as part of this process for this year. Just know, though, that OSEP does require the department to publicly post justifications. And so what we're going to do is keep the justifications last year publicly posted to fulfill the requirement for the 2019-2020 school year. So you don't have to do another justification. You're not going to have to do an internal file review, but any school system that submitted a justification that was publicly posted last year, that will stay up to fulfill this requirement. What you will have to submit is your review request form and the student-specific files for the department to review. So again, I just want to remind everyone, the goal of the alternate assessment review process is to ensure that we continue to hold students with disabilities to the highest possible grade level expectations and ensure students are taking the most appropriate assessment. It is critical that only students with the most significant cognitive disabilities participate in the alternate assessment, because we know that the decision to align a student's academic program with alternate achievement standards limits a student's exposure to the full range of grade level academic content. This limited or modified exposure also impacts academic outcomes and post-secondary opportunities for students. So again, we just want to make sure that the right students are taking the right assessment. Just to reiterate again, ESSA does require that school systems with more than 1% of students participating in ELA, math, or science alternate assessment take certain actions. Alternate assessment participation data and review packages outlining these actions were put or uploaded to your FTP drives in the beginning of August. So those are available. They've been available for about the last 2 weeks. We've heard from school systems with questions already, so we know that y'all are accessing them. All school systems received something uploaded to their FTP drive. So everybody received a memo that outlines this review process, and every school system received their participation data files. School systems exceeding 1% received some additional files. These included a review request form that requires the school system to make assurances and complete other actions and provide some evidence of these assurances. And school systems that exceeded 1% also received a student-specific file request. Your file requests include up to 10 student files to be submitted to the department for review. So every school system received a request of at least 10. If you received less than 10, it means that you tested less than 10 students. So all school systems need to retrieve these alternate assessment packages from the FTP. To find those, you're going to go into the FTP or have your data manager or whoever in your school system has access to this drive. And what they're looking for is a folder that begins with your LEA code, your LEA name, and then ends with AA 2020. It's a zipped folder. Inside there, you'll find the school system memo, you'll find your data. If you exceeded 1%, you'll find the review request form and the student-specific file selection. All school systems must review your participation data to determine whether or not you went over 1% in any of the content areas. And then school systems not exceeding 1% in any content area are not required to take any additional actions. So you'll just go to the FTP, grab the memo, grab your data files, and review your data. Anybody who exceeded, you will review the memo, review your data, get the review request form, and your student-specific selection document. So school systems exceeding 1% participation in any content area must review alternate assessment participation data disaggregated by subgroups. School systems must also submit the alternate assessment review request. This review request requires assurances that school systems address any disproportionality in participation rates, follow the state's participation criteria, train IEP team members, and submit up to 10 student-specific files for review by the department. These additional actions must be completed by September 2nd. Student-specific files and the review request form are also due on or before September 2nd. Here's a timeline of the actions we just covered. So school systems do have access to the participation data and should be reviewing this information now. Systems exceeding 1% participation should be gathering student-specific files, evaluation reports to submit these to the department for review. Again, the alternate assessment review forms and requested student-specific files are due no later than September 2nd. As soon as you have them ready, you can upload them to the FTP. More than welcome to upload them early. We did have some school systems who've already submitted the required documents for this process, but they are due no later than September 2nd. These files will need to be submitted again to the FTP, and then the department will review the submissions and the student files in September. We will notify school systems of the alternate assessment review outcomes, and then school systems will need to address any feedback and may need to take additional actions prior to the next administration of the alternate assessment. So as I just mentioned, all school systems received their letter outlining the alternate assessment review process and the alternate assessment participation data to review. School systems with greater than 1% participation in ELA, math, or science need to then take some additional actions. So we're going to cover now the review of your participation data. And you're going to review this data to determine if there's any disproportionality in any subgroup. Just a quick note about this slide here. The links at the top of each of these columns, these section headings, if you click on those, they actually link to that section in the slide deck, not external documents, but just to the section in the slide deck. So again, each school system received a file with data for the entire school system. This is just a screenshot of what your school system's participation data file looks like. Again, I know some school systems have accessed this already, some have not gotten their files from the FTP, so we just wanted a screenshot here just to let you know what you're looking for. So the school system data was delivered as an Excel file so that you can sort or filter the data as you need to as you look through it. The arrows on this slide here indicate the columns titled participation percentage for each of the content areas. This is where you can locate the percentages used to determine which areas you exceeded 1% participation. You can see here that this sample school system exceeded 1% participation in ELA and math, but not in science. So just note that we're looking at the participation rate in the all students row. So data from the other rows are the data that you're going to need to examine your data for any disproportionality by subgroup. But when you're looking to see if your school system exceeded 1% in any content area, you want to look at that row that says all students. As mentioned before, the number of LEAP Connect testers is based on test registration and IEP information. The number of all testers is based on school systems enrollment files that were provided to the department, since the regular LEAP assessment was not administered. If your school system has more than one school, you did receive an additional data file with data disaggregated by subgroups at the school level. This participation information is found in the same columns as your school system. They're just in two different files. This data might be helpful to school systems to identify sources of disproportionality and also be able to identify any trends or patterns across school sites within the school system. So here's a screenshot of what the school level data would look like. School systems that only have one site only received one file. And school systems with more than one site did receive two data files, a school level file and a system level file. So school systems must review alternate assessment participation data first. This data review must also include a review for disproportionality in any ESSA subgroups shown on this slide. The school systems review process and findings for disproportionality that's going to get documented on the alternate assessment participation review request form. In addition to the data file provided with the alternate assessment review package, school systems may also use any other data that you have available, including data obtained through SIR reports, to assist in your data review process. Reviewing data is easiest if you do it prior to completing the review request form. I'm just going to pause here quick and check the chat box to see if we have any questions about the data review process. Yeah, it looks like there are some questions just about reviewing data for disproportionality. So as in previous years, the department doesn't provide a formula for reviewing your data for disproportionality, because there are a lot of elements of your data and a lot of local context surrounding how you might examine that. So it's really important that school systems pull together a team that's knowledgeable about data and how to look at that data to discuss whether or not the school system identifies any disproportionality in the data. And then as we get into the review request, we'll talk about where you'll document what your review process is. Again, we expect that not everyone's process will be the same, and there's definitely some local context and some additional data that school systems will bring to those discussions to determine if you have any disproportionality in your alternate assessment participation. If you have other questions on that, you're more than welcome, again, to send those at specialeducation@la.gov. So there's a question about what areas that you review information in if you're not over 1% in all areas. So again, once you get your data, if your participation percentage is over 1% in any area, then you're required to complete this review process. And so you're required to complete all steps of it. You're required to review your data. You're required to address any disproportionality you see in your data. After you go over 1% in any subject area, the steps or the additional actions that you take in these forms that you have aren't broken down by each subject. So again, if you go over 1% in any area, then you're required to take these additional steps. If you stay under 1% participation in all areas, ELA, math, and science, then you don't have to do these additional steps. All right, again, reviewing your alternate assessment participation data before completing the review request form will just make providing the explanations and assurances on the review request form easier and more efficient for you. So we're going to take a look at this review request document in detail. So school systems must complete and submit an alternate assessment participation review request form, including assurances that the school system will address any disproportionality found during the data review process, provide assurance that IEP teams received or will receive training on the eligibility criteria, and verify that evaluation results are accurately reflected in the SIR system. So we're going to walk through this review request, and we're going to do it one assurance at a time. The review request includes an overview as the first page of this document. This overview outlines the alternate assessment review process. An example of the overview page is pictured on the slide to the right. As a reminder, we did mention in the SPED Leader webinar last Thursday that some school systems have reached out with an issue trying to print all of the information on a PDF version of this document. There's some issues with text boxes not wrapping. It's not necessary to print the document, but if you wanted to, we did update this review request form. And if you need to print it, you can access a printer-friendly version in the alternate assessment resource library. The printer-friendly version of the form is also linked here on this slide. In accordance with BSEE Bulletin 111, if school systems exceed 1% participation, they are required to request a participation review. This process includes kind of two major components. First, school systems must provide assurance that the school system followed the state's guidelines for participation in the alternate assessment and will address any disproportionality in the percentage of students in any subgroup taking the alternate assessment. Second, school systems must also provide evidence that the school system analyzed participation data, trained IEP teams on participation criteria, and reviewed student data for compliance to eligibility criteria. Here's a screenshot of the review request form. This is the second page of the document, but it's really the first page of the actual form where there are fields to fill out. So we have a screenshot on the right. The directions for filling out these assurances are going to be on the left over these next couple slides. I just want to note again that this is a fillable PDF form. The open text boxes on this form they're shaded in blue or that light gray color. And then your required fields are all outlined in red. The top section of this page requires school systems to enter the school system's name. Just know once you do that, the form is set up for the name to automatically populate the other fields where you need a school system name. Assurances 1 through 5 of this form require a yes or no response, and then assurance or item number 6 is optional. So let's take a look at Assurance 1, which requires school systems to verify that students participating in the alternate assessment met Louisiana's participation criteria by verifying that all students who took the Leap Connect have evaluation results entered in SIR. A verification report can be found in the report section in SIR. This report is titled Evaluation Results Report, Alternate Assessment. And so school systems can print that report just to verify that the students who took the Leap Connect do have evaluation results in SIR, and those evaluation results were what the IEP team used to make eligibility determinations. Once that's been verified, school systems can choose yes in the drop-down menu. And you will also, a second thing to that is just make sure that the scores are accurately reflected in the SIR system. Occasionally we come across scores that are really high or really low, and it seems like there might just be a decimal point missing or negative sign missing. And so make sure that when you kind of do the cross-check with this report, you're just making sure that the scores are not only in there, but they're accurately inputted in SIR. Once you do that, again, you'll check yes here to this assurance. Assurance 2 of this form requires school systems to verify that the school system reviewed alternate assessment participation data for disproportionality amongst subgroups. Again, you'll verify this by choosing yes in the corresponding drop-down menu. School systems are then required to describe their review process of subgroup data for possible disproportionality. And you'll put just a brief description of your review process in the text field, that 2A box. If a school system finds disproportionality in any subgroup, then the school system must describe the plan to address the disproportionality, and that description will be in 2B text field. So again, 2A is a required box. That just is letting us know how you reviewed your data for disproportionality, and then 2B is optional. Well, it's required if you found disproportionality, otherwise it's not. And so just know if you find it, then you need to have a plan for how you're going to address it. All right, Assurance 3 requires school systems to verify that the school system completed training for school staff on the state's alternate assessment eligibility criteria. If training has already been completed, the school system will choose yes in the drop-down and complete the training table by providing training dates and topics. School systems are welcome to attach additional pages or create more boxes within the PDF document if you need to. If training has not been completed yet, the school system will choose no in the drop-down here, and then must complete Assurance 4, describing a plan for how you will provide this training. So Assurance 4, again, is for school systems to verify they will complete training for school staff on the state's alternate assessment eligibility criteria if you have not done this training already. If training has not been completed, school systems will choose yes to Assurance 4 in the drop-down, and then complete Assurance 4 by describing your plan for providing training in the text field. School systems may also choose yes here if you plan to conduct any additional trainings. School systems can choose no if you've responded yes to Assurance 3 and completed the training table there. Assurance 5 requires school systems to acknowledge that they understand the department will complete a review of a selected sample of student-specific files to determine if any ineligible students participated in the alternate assessment. School systems will select yes in the dropdown to provide assurance that they understand the department is conducting a file review. Item 5 also provides assurance that school systems understand that accountability measures will not be applied this year, which just means that no student scores will be converted to a 0 as like we did last year, because we didn't administer the regular assessment this year. However, the results of this year's file review will be provided to school systems so that school systems are able to address any feedback or outcomes prior to the administration of the next alternate assessment. The specific student selected files were provided as their own attachment, and I'll go over that in just a minute. As I mentioned earlier, item 6 is optional. It's included for school systems to share any additional actions they plan to take to ensure only students with the most significant cognitive disabilities participate in the alternate assessment. Again, this one is optional, but if there are actions that you're taking, we'd like for you to let us know what those are in this box. The last section of this review request form does require school systems to include contact information by providing a contact's name, position, phone number, and email address. This is really important because if there are any fields that are missing information or we have any follow-up questions to any of the information provided, it's just really helpful to know who the school system wants us to reach out to, and so this point of contact makes everything just easier and more efficient. And then ink or electronic signatures for both the special education director and school system superintendent are required on this form. The form will be uploaded to the FTP, again, no later than September 2nd. And for anybody who's been in the FTP or has worked with their data managers on this, it's always helpful to know what files are named. When you go into the FTP, it's like any other normal file folder. It has a whole list of files and folders in it. And so when you upload this review request form, it's just helpful to follow the file naming convention that we give you, which is your LEA code, LEA name. This can be abbreviated. And then the last part of it, review request 2020. This just makes it a lot easier for us to find the files because there are numerous files in your FTP drives. So we recovered the reviewing data and completing the review request form. The next step schools exceeding 1% need to take is to submit student-specific files. Before we discuss that, I'm just going to pause again. I see just a few things in the chat box. All right, so there is a question that said, if we completed the alternate assessment participation review process and assurances last year, do we need to complete it again this year? The answer is yes. This is an annual process. Again, it's required as part of ESSA and Bulletin 111. And so if you completed the process last year and you exceeded 1% again this year, you do need to complete the process again. This is an annual process. So there is a question that asks if students were selected that didn't participate in the alternate assessment or the LEAP Connect in spring, should they be on our list? The answer to that is they could be. The testing window closed the last day school facilities were open. And so we had to use a combination of testing files along with what's on students' IEPs, because everybody may or may not that last day have gotten to administering the alternate assessment. And so it is possible that you had some students selected who maybe did not participate in the alternate assessment. If that's the case, please reach out to special education at la.gov, and we can just work with you directly on how to handle those. All right, so there is a question in the chat box in regards to reviewing evaluation results in SIR. If you do notice that someone misentered evaluation results in SIR, you definitely want to go in there and fix those to make sure they're accurate. And once you've completed that process, then it would be fine to answer yes to that assurance. Again, we just want to make sure that we're getting accurate results in the SIR system, because those evaluation results are what go on to the IEP. And so that's the information the IEP team is using to determine eligibility for the alternate assessment. So if those results are inaccurate, fix them, and then answer yes to the assurance on the review request form. If you have additional questions about that, feel free to email us at specialeducation@la.gov. Question about this training occurring annually. The answer to that right now is yes. This process is an annual process. It kind of was relaunched and was new last year about the same time, maybe a little bit earlier, I think this webinar happened. And then this year we followed a similar process. Again, we made some changes just to try to offer some flexibility to school systems, because we know everybody has a lot going on right now. And so we wanted to make sure that everyone knew what those differences were between what you did last year and what's happening this year. And then also anybody who might be new to this process and has not maybe ever exceeded 1% or might be new to their position in this, we want to make sure that you folks get the support that you need as well, and making sure everyone knows how to complete this process. So yes, this is an annual training. And that looks like it for the chat box for now. So let me cover with you all how you would submit your student-specific files. So the student selection document contains directions for submitting the files. Each student was selected by a unique ID number, and that's what appears on your student selection document. So school systems must submit the evaluation report that contains qualifying scores and was in place on January 3rd for each student selected. IEPs will be reviewed in SIR unless IEPs are submitted by the school system. You are not required to submit students' IEPs. That is optional. If you don't, we do have access to the IEP in SIR. We do not have access to the evaluation report, and so evaluation reports must be submitted. A review of alternate assessment participation eligibility for the 2019-2020 school year will be conducted by the department to determine if ineligible students were administered the LEAP Connect. So in previous years, the scores of these students exceeding 1% in any of the content areas, they were converted to the lowest scale score and assigned a 0 in the school performance score. However, for the 2019-2020 school year, typical accountability measures are not going to be applied because the regular assessment was not administered. So the department will provide feedback from the file reviews so that school systems can take any necessary actions prior to the administration of the next alternate assessment. Here's a screenshot of the student-specific file selection document. This document was sent with your alternate assessment review packages and uploaded on the FTP. The student-specific file selection lists the supporting documentation required for the department to conduct a review of eligibility. The chart at the bottom of this student sample request contains the ID number for the selected students whose files need to be sent to the department for review. The chart must be completed indicating the page numbers that contain evaluation results used to determine if the student is eligible to participate in the alternate assessment. This chart must be submitted with the student files. So again, everybody received a document that looks like the one on the screen here. In the bottom, in the chart, you'll find your unique ID numbers. Those represent the students who have been selected from your school system. You'll need to go gather their evaluation reports that contain the scores that were used by your IEP teams. And within those reports, we want you to identify for each student the page number in which we can find the cognitive and or adaptive functioning results. School systems must submit the evaluation report that was in place for the student on January 3rd. January 3rd is that required date that's 30 days prior to the testing window open. And so we need the report, the valid reports that were in effect as of that date that contain the score that your IEP team used. This report will be uploaded to the FTP and must include the student's UID on the file and be sent with the correct file name provided in the guidance document. If a waiver was in place on January 3rd, the student file that you upload should also contain the evaluation report that was in place immediately prior to the waiver. Evaluation reports must contain the results that qualified students to be eligible for LEAP Connect. As a reminder, in grades 3 through 8, a student is eligible for that first criterion of the LEAP Connect criteria if they have a qualifying cognitive functioning results in the evaluation report. Students in grades 9 and above are eligible for that first criterion to take the LEAP Connect if they have a qualifying cognitive and or adaptive results reported in the evaluation report. School systems are required to complete the chart, again, providing information to indicate the page number of the cognitive and or adaptive assessment results. This chart will be submitted along with the student files to the department, again, uploaded to the FTP, and is due on or before September 2nd. So again, you'll be submitting student evaluation reports. You'll be indicating in the chart the page number where the cognitive and or adaptive functioning results can be found, and you'll submit both the student files and the chart, completed chart, by uploading those to the FTP. School systems may choose to submit a student's IEP and alternate assessment criteria checklist. Again, that was in effect on January 3rd, 2020, but these are optional. If the IEP is not submitted, the department can access the IEP documents in SIR. So again, submitting the IEP or the checklist are optional. We can access those in the SIR system, but we cannot access the evaluation reports in SIR, and so those do need to be uploaded to the FTP. So this slide covers the file naming conventions. Student files must be saved individually by the student ID number. This is really important just to protect any student personally identifiable information. And so what you want to make sure you do is if you pull the student's evaluation report or any waivers or reevaluations, you want to save that as its own file with the file name being the student's ID number _ LEA code. If you're just submitting the student's evaluation report, they'll just have that one file. Again, their ID number _ LEA code. If more than one file needs to be submitted for the same student, You're going to name each file following the same conventions, but add an identifier. So if I'm submitting a student's IEP, I would scan the IEP or save it as a PDF, and the file name would be the student's ID number underscore your LEA code underscore IEP. And then if I was also submitting an evaluation report, I would save that PDF or scan that with the file name, the student's ID number underscore LEA code underscore evaluation. That way anybody accessing the file can identify the student by their ID number. They know which LEA the student is in, and they know what document they're opening. Okay, so again, this step is relevant if you're submitting more than one file per student. All student files and the chart with the page numbers completed will then get zipped into a folder, and that folder will get uploaded to the FTP. The name of that folder should be the LEA code underscore LEA name underscore AA review student files. So again, you'll have one zipped folder. Inside that zipped folder, you'll have files with student ID numbers. And those student ID numbers will be how we'll know which students are being reviewed. If you have questions about this, when you get to this step, please email us at specialeducation@la.gov, and we're happy to jump on the phone and talk anybody through this part. All right, I'm going to pause here again just to answer any questions from the chat box before we summarize the information presented and just cover what the next steps will be for school systems. Question, do we need to hide the student names in the report? I think we got this question last year, anybody who did this last year. The answer to that is no. The review team is able to view that information. So you don't need to redact student names in the reports. However, if it's easy for you to do that, we know a lot of school systems last year did. It was a kind of find and cover function in PDF. You're more than welcome to do that and black those things out. So there's a question about which evaluation reports and waivers. The department review team needs the evaluation report that contains the scores that your IEP team used to determine eligibility for the alternate assessment. So you want to make sure that when you submit the evaluation report, you are submitting the report that contains the scores that were used by your IEP team. You also need to make sure you submit whatever was in place for January 3rd. And if you have more questions about that, feel free to email us at specialeducation@la.gov. But we need the report that was in place on January 3rd, and then we need the report that contains the evaluation results used by your IEP team to determine eligibility for alternate assessment. If you just send us one that contains the eligibility for alternate assessment scores, and that happened to be 6 years ago, without the most current one that was in place on January 3rd, we're not able to verify that there isn't more recent assessment results. So you want to make sure, again, you're sending the evaluation report that was in place that covers January 3rd, and you're sending the report that has the qualifying scores if it's not the most recent report. Again, should names be removed from evaluation report? It is not necessary, but if you would like to do that, you are welcome to. Again, lots of folks use a find and cover function in PDF to black out identifying information. There is a question about if the most recent reevaluation report includes the scores used to determine eligibility for alternate assessment. Do we need to send the initial evaluation report? That is no. We need, again, evaluation or reevaluation report for 2020. If that scores your IEP the IEP used. There's a question about this slide deck. Where do I get a copy of it? Sarah doesn't mind pasting the link in the chat box. If you need a link to the slide deck, that is now available in your talks. The recording of this will be posted as soon as we can get it up. It gets down a day or two to work with our team who posts it, but it'll be up. Definitely before the end of this week. You can always email special.gov for a recording. It looks like that covers all the questions in the chat box so far. So we just have one on next steps, and then I'll go back to the chat box before we close this webinar. So this is just a summary of the key actions. Just a quick note to the links on this slide, they link to the corresponding information in this presentation. So I just want to really kind of summarize and go over the actions that have to be completed again by September. And alternate must review alternate assessment participation data for disproportionality by subgroups. School systems must also complete and submit the alternate assessment review request form. Those were the assurances that we covered. And then school systems must compile and submit the required students to the department for review. School systems are responsible for completing and uploading the review request form and all requested student-specific files, along with that page number chart, to the FTP no later than September 2nd. If you have any questions or just need additional assistance completing anything in this process, email us at specialeducationla.gov, and we're happy to assist with whatever ever you need to complete these documents and submit the files. I'm gonna just take another look here in the chat box and see we've got a few more questions before I close out. Y'all, I apologize. It sounds like the questions and comments in the chat box were about the audio kind of going in and out here at the end. If there's something specific that you want me to cover before we end the webinar, please just put that in the chat box now. Happy to stick around for a few more minutes. And again, apologize for the audio cutting in and out a little bit. All right, oh, here we go. Question about where are the documents that are available to type on. Yeah, the review request form was uploaded to your FTP. There's a property fee in that text box where the text isn't ready, trying to print review request. So if you want your friendly version of that, we did upload that into Cognitive Dis at the bottom of that page. All right, looks like I'm going to cut out for a second again. So the review request form, the printer-friendly version, is at the bottom of the Students with Significant Cognitive Disabilities resource library. There's a section titled Alternate Assessment. That's where that is also where you can find the slide. And it will be where we put as an alternate assessment section at the bottom of that library, where you can find all of these documents, the slide post recordings for this webinar. Another question about disproportionality. Again, we don't know how to determine if school systems have disproportionality by subgroups. There's local context that gets applied to this type of data review and analysis so that you bring together to discuss it, to determine if you see any disproportionality amongst those subgroups. And if you want to talk through that further, again, feel free to email us, especially, again, help with whatever parts of this process that we can assist you with. Somebody is asking for the Sarah if she doesn't mind putting that link into the chat box. So anybody who wants the link to our Students with Significant box. We're going to work to get that link to the Students with Significant Cognitive. Sarah says it's coming. I know. Again, I apologize for cutting out a little bit here at the end. All right, it looks like we were able to get to the questions that were in the chat box. Email us at gov. We do have links to the slide deck in the chat box. We have links to the printer-friendly version of the review request form and a link to our Students with Significant Cognitive Disabilities resource library. So if you need those links, they're in the chat box. And if you have any other questions, please email us, specialeducation@la.gov. Thank you all again for attending the webinar today, and reach out if there are things we can assist you with as you prepare your review request forms and student files.